I feel honored to be back again. Some people, we all have fears in different ways, and some people are afraid of things like public speaking. That has never been my plight. But I do have, fears in other ways. And one of them I think that I thought of as I was kind of preparing this, I used to say, or I used to think anyway, I don't know if I would have admitted it publicly, but I used to feel like I was afraid of the dark. And it's a common fear that people have, especially when we're younger. But the more I think of it, I don't think that I actually was or am afraid of the dark. I think it's actually the fear of confined spaces. Because I experienced a dinner a number of years ago at a restaurant in Toronto where it was you go for dinner, you pay money, but the whole thing is the experience as though you're blind. And so it's completely in the dark. And the feeling of claustrophobia when it was completely dark was like overwhelming. And the only thing that got me through it was that I was wearing a watch at the time. And so I cheated, right? Like I had a watch and there was just a little bit of a glow. And so I could kind of feel that there was depth. It wasn't fear of something, in the dark that was going to harm me, but it was just the sense that I couldn't see, and I felt like everything around me. Some would say I've maybe struggled with a fear of growing up. And in fact, it has been said, I've got to get it right, woe betide the woman who ends up with Mark Hamilton or Jamie Weber. And that's not written in the Bible. It's from the book of Victoria. I think it was 97 or 98 maybe, but at chapter 19, way back in the day. But yes, we all have fears, and I think I was kind of going into this thinking fear and hope as being conflicting things, and yet I kind of feel like sometimes a little bit of discomfort is what causes us to lean on God and trust more. So a little bit of fear as far as just discomfort is not a bad thing if it causes the proper response for our hearts, which we'll get to. I'm going to talk a little bit about El Salvador to start this off, and I kind of intended that this would be about like pushing some people across the finish line, but it's not. But it's still, El Salvador has been. I've been 4 times now, and going back in November, and I've been 3. I've been 3 times, and this will be my 4th. I'm adding extra trips. I'm anticipating going a 5th time as well, but I haven't got that one planned yet. So going back in the history of the country of El Salvador, 14 families formed the oligarchy that owned El Salvador. And this goes back into the 1800s and into the 19th century as well. And those families controlled pretty much all the land in El Salvador. Now, there were cities and there were people who owned homes in those cities, but all of the tillable land in El Salvador was owned by 14 families. Now, it's not a big country, but it's not that small, right? And so the population of that country served these 14 families. When I first went, I came back and I was trying to explain to Steve what I had seen in El Salvador. And I said, you know how it's said in Canada that farmers are land rich and cash poor? And I said, in El Salvador, they're land poor and cash poor. Yeah. They don't own the land. They go and work for $7 a day in blazing heat. To work the land that's now used to be owned by one of these 14 oligarchs and is now owned by a corporation and usually a big sugar company that we buy our sugar from here. El Salvador had a brutal civil war that ran from 1980 to 1992. Which is like pretty much the entire time I was in school, right here in Shawville. And my biggest fear was Mrs. Conrad, right? And they were like, fearing for their life. This civil war pitted the U.S.-backed military government against a coalition, and I like how this was written, I'm quoting something here, but it was written, a coalition of leftist guerrilla groups known as the Farabundo Marti National Liberation Front. So this, in a time of world history, right? Like zoom out from El Salvador and think about world history at this time. What's going on in the 70s and into the 80s is the Cold War. And so the idea that the poor in El Salvador would rise up automatically creates the idea that they are leftist. Right, and it's written here in the research. But essentially, the U.S. was backing the military because they didn't want another country that could potentially go communist, where the poor people would have. So they continued that war going until 1992. Coincidentally, around the time the Cold War ended was when they found peace in El Salvador. A 12-year war resulted in approximately 750,000 deaths. It actually began in March 1980. Archbishop and prominent human rights campaigner Oscar Romero was assassinated while giving Mass in San Salvador. He was a Catholic priest performing Mass, and he was assassinated in the church. And shortly after, about a year after, 4 American nuns were taken out, were killed on the side of the road. And the government defense for this action, was the nuns must have had guns. And so the idea of the nuns were fighting against the government forces was presented, which was interesting. This was 1990, and the U.S. continued to support the government, who had killed American nuns, for another 12 years, right, or another 11 years. In 1984, Jose Napoleon Durante of the Christian Democratic Party won the presidential election, and he attempted limited land reform, starting with a tentative peace negotiations. And then in November 1989, the FMLN, launched their largest offensive, and shortly after, the government responded by executing 6 prominent Jesuit priests, their housekeeper, and her family. And then, as the Cold War ended, the Berlin Wall came down, and so there was no tension, capitalism versus communism anymore, and so suddenly they were able to find a path to peace. For decades, though, the country has lived with trying to put things back together. And during that civil war, a number of people fled as refugees across the border into the United States. That sparked the next wave of trouble in El Salvador, because many, many people had fled from El Salvador to the United States. This is very interesting. And so we know, or we've heard about the El Salvadorian gangs. MS-13 was one of the major gangs, and it was created in Los Angeles, California, by refugees who had fled from El Salvador during the 1980s due to the Civil War. The Barrio 18 was another major gang in El Salvador, and it was created in the U.S. by Mexican immigrants in the 1960s who were not accepted by other Hispanic gangs because the gangs have tended to follow nationalities, and so that was part of what formed the MS-13, was that there wasn't an opportunity to join gangs that weren't from their nationality. In 1992, after the Civil War had ended, it was time then for the U.S. to start deportations. And during the Clinton administration, they rounded up and sent back to El Salvador exported key members of these gangs and dumped them off in San Salvador and said, here you go, here's your problem back. We taught them a few things. Both gangs divided up El Salvador into their territories, and by 2016, they had a presence in 247 of El Salvador's 262 municipalities. So they were everywhere. You weren't, there was, what's the math, 15 municipalities in the entire country that didn't have have them, and so you weren't likely to just be able to move to the next municipality to escape. The gangs charged extortion fees to people trying to enter or leave their controlled areas. So if Bristol was owned by one gang and Clarendon was owned by another, every time you crossed from Bristol to Clarendon, you had to pay the gang. They would also extort businesses, threaten and commit violence, and all sorts of things that happened. In 2015, El Salvador's homicide rate reached 103 homicides per 100,000 people. It was for years the highest homicide rate in the world. In 2004, there were between 10,000 and 39,000 gang members. But by the time 2022 rolled around, they're estimated at north of 80,000. 120,000. An extra 100,000 for good measure. In June 2019, newly inaugurated President Nayib Bukele, started the process of combating this horrible gang violence that had gripped the country. And that has continued, and the homicide rate, though at first actually continued to increase during his tenure. As the gangs were feeling threatened by the government, they were lashing out to try to get the people to be afraid of them and to stop supporting the government. Bukele still enjoys an insanely, extremely high approval rating of 85% approval of his presidency from native Salvadorians. That's not something that a Prime Minister of Canada has ever seen, right? The crackdown continues, and of course you'll hear it now on the news, especially because of the ties to the Trump administration and the sending Trump administration sending Salvadorian prisoners and the history of Venezuelan prisoners being sent as well down to CICOT. You can't get anywhere close to it, so I've never seen this massive 40,000 prisoner prison. But when you drive on the highway at night, you can see the glow. It reminds me of driving in the States on a Friday night, and you can see the football field in the small town, driving along, and you see this glow of lights off over the trees. And so you just know that the CICOT 40,000 person prison is there. Domestically, the crackdown has been popular amongst Salvadorans. Because of course they were tired of the gang violence. They were tired of being extorted. Conversely, international human rights groups have expressed concern because many of these accused gang members, part of this is just rounding up based on suspicion rather than trial, right? So many of these people are being imprisoned without due process, and yet they felt that they started, what has allowed it is that they started a state of exception in 2022, where they could pause human rights because the gang problem in their country had grown so severely. So they continue to hold on to the state of exception, and now people, though, are still supportive because they feel safe walking. People who had fled the country feel safe to return home. So it's a complex issue. It's not quite as simple as you might pick up on the local news or whatever. Politicians across Latin America in countries such as Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Ecuador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Peru have implemented or have called for the implementation of security policies that are similar to those implemented by Bukele. I'm not here to speak pro or con, really, other than speaking pro for the people of El Salvador. The government's tactics are not tactics that I would like to live under, but at the same time, I wouldn't want to live under the gang's tactics either. But that's just a brief historical view as I kind of walk you through what the people have been living through. This small country, which the name of El Salvador translates to the Savior. It's had more than its share of violence and suffering at the hands of human beings. Yet they've also had to deal with natural disasters, earthquakes causing mudslides, volcanoes, on and on. And it was after a series of earthquakes and mudslides that left hundreds of thousands of people in El Salvador without a safe home that a small group of friends from Alberta felt compelled to help. They flew down for 1 week and built 3 homes for 3 different families. And while this number may seem small, it was what formed the mission, the vision, and the mission of Shelter. And we're going to play a quick video here. If we can.
Father, we just thank you for an incredibly beautiful day. We thank you for the breeze that we have this morning. Thank you for safe travels. Multiply, do not dwindle. Work for the peace and prosperity of the city where I sent you.
Little hands, shoeless feet, lonely eyes looking back at me. Will we leave behind the innocent to grieve? On their own, on the run, when their lives have only begun. These could be our daughters and our sons. And just like a drum, I can hear their hearts beating. I know my God
So yes, that video is from our January Leaders Week. And in November 2026, I will be making my 4th trip. So the team will be Ottawa and the Valley, so there may be some familiar faces. Part of me wanting to talk about Shelter a little bit this morning was to kind of push them over the finish line, but they're reaching that way on their own. I don't have to resort to those tactics. But I would ask that as we are there in El Salvador and as we prepare, that we be in your prayers. We'll be going down with an undetermined number of people at this time, but we'll be going down with a team and building houses. What started with those friends from Alberta going and building 3 houses, as you saw in the video there, they were in the 7,400 range. So I expect that by the time we get there in November, we'll be in the 8,000s, we covet your prayers and your support as we prepare. I'm happy to answer questions for anybody. I'm gonna scanning through what I have, but yeah. So Shelter has had a major impact, I would say, on my life, and it has been something that has been, I would say, a discomfort, right? And that's where that impact or that growth has come from, is the discomfort of having to ask people for money. That discomfort of my first trip, I joined my cousin Phil. He featured heavily. It was funny. Phil's in all of those shots, but almost every shot I would be like, "That's my elbow right there," or "That's like," it's like every shot. I'm just out of the frame of like so many of those shots. But I guess Phil's more photogenic than I am, but that's okay. We all have our gifts. But I went with his team, which was coming down from Edmonton, and I was the lone person coming from Ottawa and flying out of Ottawa, and so I'm flying alone, right? Like, I'm getting on a plane to Washington Dulles, and I've got 15 minutes to make it to my flight from Dulles to San Salvador, so I'm sprinting through the airport and get on the plane. We get off, and I meet up with everybody in San Salvador, meeting everybody other than Phil and Rochelle for the very first time, and discover that my luggage is not there. And it was an amazing time, but it was a time of pure discomfort. My luggage got lost going and coming back. I got back, and I waited in the Ottawa airport, and no luggage. And so I went to the United Airlines table, and he said, "Oh, I'm sorry, sir. Your suitcase is still in St. Louis." And I said, "I never went to St. Louis. I flew San Salvador to Washington to Ottawa." And he said, "Well, I don't know how it ended up in St. Louis, but that's where it is." And so anyway, so it was eventually, luggage eventually, but it was funny. It actually, my luggage ended up delivered faster in El Salvador than it did the other way, getting it up to Gracefield. Like, trying to deal with the Ottawa airport, getting my suitcase up to Gracefield was like they thought I was in the far north or something. They couldn't figure it out. Anyway, so how do I tie this in to a passage? But Psalm 1:3 says that a person rooted in their faith shall be like a tree planted by streams of water. I think that if we are talking about ourselves and thinking of these kind of topics of soil, it causes discomfort. That's my tie-in, right? Is that like we think of our heart like kind of as a unit, but today I want to challenge us to like unfold our hearts and lay them out and think of them as a field. Right? It's a whole field, because in the passage we're going to get to, talks about our hearts as though they were soil. A tree planted by streams of water, which yield fruit in season and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever they do will prosper. In order for a seed to grow and ultimately prosper, it must first be planted. A seed is generally planted in soil of quality, and the quality of that soil, has a huge impact on the growth of that seed. If we had, I could have brought, but I didn't want to make more work for Andrew by possibility of causing a mess here, right? But I could have brought a few pots and had different types of soil, right? And we all know where I'm going with this. And we could have like really nice, dark soil, or we could have like really sandy soil, or we could have like really compacted soil, or we could have like, a thing of rocks. And we, do the whole thing. Which one do you think the seed's going to grow in better? And that's true. And then I think that's how our hearts are. But what I want to challenge us to think about is the fact that our hearts aren't necessarily one thing. Like I was thinking about like sometimes, I'm sure not anymore, but like sometimes like a field, you look at a field and you see like in some places the corn is like 10 feet tall. And then there'll be another corner of the field where there's hardly any corn at all, or maybe it's like this high, right? Like you go through like a spot and it's like, well, the soil's not as good and that's what's causing it. We know this, but you see like a field isn't exactly the same in every inch of it. Of course, that's what you're aiming to do, right? As farmers. I shouldn't speak for a farmer, but I played one at one point in time, but the idea is that you're trying to balance the soil across your whole field. It doesn't always happen, right? And I think it's the same for our hearts. Jesus talks about when he gives the parable of the sower. Jesus says, a farmer went out to sow his seed, and as he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path. The birds came and ate it. Some fell on the rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow, but when the sun came, the plants were scorched and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among the thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. And still other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop. 160 or 30 times what was sown. He who has ears, let him hear. That's from Matthew 13, verses 3 through 9. 8 verses later in Matthew, Jesus explains the parable to his disciples, and he says, listen then to what the parable of the sower means. When anyone hears the message of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in his heart. This is the seed sown along the path. And the one who received the seed that fell on rocky places is the one who hears the word and once receives it with joy, but since he has no root, he lasts only a short time. And when trouble or persecution comes because of the word, he quickly falls away. And the one who receives the seed that fell among the thorns is the one who hears the word but worries of this life, and the deceitfulness of wealth choke it out, making it unfruitful. But the one who receives the seed that fell on the ground, on the good soil, is the one who hears the word and understands it. He produces a crop yielded 160 or 30 times what was sown. So Jesus gives those 4 different scenarios of seed being spread in that parable. Many have heard this. This isn't going to be earth-shattering for some of you. He explains that the seed is the word, the good news shared with others. The soil is the heart of a person, where the seed of good news can take root. Jesus makes it clear that the problems in this parable don't occur with the seed, but the problems arise depending on the kind of soil the seed falls onto. I may be in danger of going slightly extra biblical, but I believe that even once we receive that seed, that we still need to tend the soil of our hearts. I believe that as we recognize, as we grow in Christ, there may be other areas of our hearts that are not hospitable soil for the gospel. There are other areas of our lives that we have to continue to tend. I sent Steve a meme this week that said, I could never work a 9-to-5 job. I like working my 100-hour work week whenever I want to. I could never punch a clock kind of idea. There is still work to be done, right? After we accept Jesus, the adventure is just beginning. Different types of soil, different types of things happen in our lives. A hardened heart, oblivious heart, a barren wasteland. And I think that although in this context Jesus is talking about the gospel, sometimes we can be, as Christians, oblivious to what the work that God wants us to do. Sometimes we gain that seed back and we don't turn around and sow it again. Some are opposed to the good news, and some of those are just oblivious. Personal volition or innocent omission, the parable is clear that the seed will not grow where there is inhospitable soil. And Jesus even uses the term, the enemy will come and snatch the seed away because he doesn't want the seed to have any opportunity to take root or grow in that person's life. This kind of soil will never reproduce. Moving on in chapter 13, verses 20 and 21, to the soil, a troubled heart, the shallow roots on soil that doesn't have depth. I think that's something that's part of why technology now allows it, but it used to be done